want to turn now on something. This is kind of related to our interview we had with Congressman Chip Roy earlier today, who, again, just a stellar member of Congress. But I want to turn to where we are, and I was calling this segment kind of the ADD segment. You know, we have asylum, detention, and deportation. When President Trump ran for the presidency, when he was candidate Trump, he focused on the border. He called national attention to the situation at the southern border. Now, to be clear, President Obama, in his 8 years in the White House, spent a lot of time luring people up from Central America in one way or another, luring them to come forward, sending the signal that in America we're about to give amnesty to all these DACA people, we're about to give amnesty to other people. The message to Central America was, just get up here quickly enough and somehow you'll get to stay. You'll get to stay in America. So the southern border was in crisis. Even in 2014, President Obama was calling it a crisis, although his answer to the crisis was send money, give them food, let them all come in, somehow make them citizens. It was a crisis engendered by his conduct. And then he intended to have Congress then feed these people, house them, clothe them, bring them into America, and have them on a zip line to becoming citizens. He assumed all this would happen when Hillary Clinton would, in his plan, win the 2016 presidential election. Well, as we all know, Hillary lost. President Trump came along. During his campaign, one of the primary issues he ran on was securing the southern border and the larger issue of having our immigration policies and our refugee policies comport with the best interests of America. That was his point, and Americans rallied around that. Told the story many times on the show. I have a friend here in Dallas who is a third generation American. Her grandparents came from Mexico. She grew up, so she's Hispanic. She grew up right along the southern border on a ranch. And she's Republican, and she is of Mexican descent. And she told me, in fact, she said on the show one time, I had her on several years ago, that the moment she saw President Trump, candidate Trump, come down that escalator at Trump Tower and make his announcement, the announcement that so many people tried to just pounce on and say it was racist, that he made reference to the kind of people crossing the southern border, she said, I grew up on the southern border. He's exactly right. That's exactly what's happening at the southern border. These people crossing the border, they're full of people who are dangerous criminals crossing our southern border. They cross over the ranches along the southern border. So this whole idea that the left tried to say, well, Trump was a racist because he wanted to close the border, this is an ongoing effort of the left. And the reason that President Trump won his campaign, in large part, was reasserting the idea that our border security, our refugee policy, our immigration policies should all be centered around the idea of keeping America secure. America first, keeping American citizens secure. So this is kind of an update in the three areas where we just have this battle ongoing. I nicknamed it ADD, was Asylum, Deportation, and Detention Centers. As a quick aside, I want to mention that in Nancy Pelosi's effort to try to contain the progressive left, she had to surrender a few weeks ago. I think it was June 27th, so Thursday, June 27th, the House finally voted yes on a bill that had come back to them from the Senate, which gave President Trump a significant chunk of money he'd been asking for that was to help along the southern border, to help people along the border patrol, the border facilities, help them have enough people working there, have enough of their equipment they need, the facilities they need. It was a $4.6 billion Senate bill to send emergency funding to the border. And so this was a Nancy Pelosi thing. The Speaker of the House had previously said, we're not going to fund President Trump's efforts. We're not doing one thing. We're not going to help. And she really got kind of shamed and embarrassed into it. And so she went along, and the House went along and supported giving that money to the president to help secure the southern border. Progressive. And I mean, Nancy Pelosi says she's progressive. The radical leftists that run the party now, which are the freshman squad, the foursome, and people like them, were outraged that Nancy Pelosi even gave President Trump that funding. They would starve the border patrol, starve the needs of America at the border in order to get their way, get their mission, which is essentially to abandon the southern border entirely. So where we are on the border issues, I want to mention first on asylum. To be really clear what asylum is, and I've been over this before, but it's so important to understand. Asylum is an ancient concept asylum has been discussed in world history. As far back as the ancient Greeks had this idea that if you are a truly oppressed person, if you live in a country where you're truly oppressed, you're in danger from the government, that if you try to go to another country, the country receiving you will look at your situation, assess and decide whether or not you really have a credible fear of persecution. And if you do, they'll find some basis to allow you to stay. And so in America and truly throughout the world, the concept of asylum is if you're seeking asylum in America, if you enter America illegally, you're seeking asylum. Asylum has the same standards as applies to refugees. And refugees are people who stay in their home country or stay in some other refugee center outside of America, make application to come to America, and are granted the refugee status, and they come here. Asylum is exactly the same standards, except people make it inside our border, and then, so the only difference is the asylees or potential asylees, people seeking asylum, are in our border. The standard for asylum is you have to show you have a credible fear of persecution due to race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. The point is, you don't have a right to asylum, to break into America and say, I'd like to stay, I want asylum, if your complaint is that there aren't enough jobs in your country, or that your home country is poor, or that you have poor living conditions in your home country. Asylum is a long-standing international concept that the world understood. In fact, the European Court of Justice just had a ruling again along these lines. One of the points of asylum is if you're really leaving the country where you fear persecution, you must seek asylum in the first safe country you get to. It is fundamental, Law School 101. Part of the asylum idea is if you're the one fleeing your country and trying to go somewhere else to safety, the first safe country you come to must be the place you seek asylum. So President Trump is trying to put in place here in America tighter asylum standards at the southern border. He is trying to put into America's system under this rule that was published online Monday of this week, trying to put basically that idea of that with limited exceptions, migrants who are passing through another country must seek asylum in that safe country. So people coming to America from the Central American countries cross through Mexico. They'd have to seek asylum in Mexico. And this is really just, I want to make it clear, President Trump didn't just come up with this idea, out of clear blue. It's been standard issue asylum under policy for literally thousands of years. And so this is a new rule published by the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. It was published and took effect on Tuesday. Naturally, the ACLU and other left-wing they say they're pro-immigration. They're actually just anti-border. They're anti-America. They're anti-idea of having an America that exists as a sovereign nation as we know it. So they want to eliminate border security, eliminate the relevance of borders, which ultimately eliminates the sovereignty of America. So those groups, ACLU, other ones, are in court today as we speak in San Francisco, arguing that this new law, this new rule that President Trump had published by the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security violates some other federal law, and they're trying to get it struck down by a judge. And so the battle goes on. But to be really clear on asylum, just because someone comes here and says my home country is poor and I can't find a job, they do not qualify for asylum. America literally cannot take in every person in this world who is seeking asylum. On a similar note on asylum, the United States Senate, the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee came up with a new idea called Operation Safe Return. And they've got bipartisan support for this. And this, again, on asylum idea, the basic idea is people get here, we guarantee you make application, you lay out your credible fear of persecution, the standard in law. If you don't have that credible fear of persecution, if you don't meet America's standards, 15 days, turn around, go home. It's called Operation Safe Return. The Senate is getting in on the idea we have to begin applying reasonable, long-standing asylum ideas. and then my ADD, asylum, and then detention and deportation. I just want to remind you again, the detention facilities, how dishonest the American left has been, particularly the squad, particularly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, claiming these horrific conditions. These are conditions that she just generates out. I mean, and others have too claimed that these people seeking asylum aren't allowed to hug each other, and that they're held in solitary confinement, and that they're in horrific conditions. A bunch of garbage intended to sway the ignorant and uninformed in this country. I'm glad we had Congressman Chip Roy on with us earlier today talking about the idea. He toured an ICE detention facility, nicer than a lot of homes people have in this country. When these people have basketball court, they got ping pong tables, they have iPads available if they want to check on the news, 3 square meals a day, a dentist on a dental facility, a health facility on site. We're not torturing these people. We are trying to have order at the border. Last point on this is that President Trump actually began the process, as we all been talking about, of deportation. To be really clear about deportation, the only people President Trump and the federal government are trying to deport from America are people who've already exhausted all legal remedies, have already made their argument for asylum or whatever other status they were seeking, have no legal right to be here, and once they got their final deportation order from a legitimate judge and court in this country, chose instead to go into hiding instead of to leave as they were told to do in the deportation order. Those are the people that President Trump is removing. And I found a poll. I actually found it kind of disappointing. There was a poll about deportation, and it said that 51% of voters, 51% of voters, support the sweeping raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. They support the raids of deporting these people who have no legal right to be here. Folks, that should be 99%. Now, I'm telling you, if it's 51%, we're barely over half that can't even get to the notion, if you don't have a legal right to be here, you have to be helped to go home. You have to be forced to go home. I actually suspect that's a misleading poll. I think even more people than just 51%. In fact, they only got 35% of people who said they firmly oppose these efforts. And so you still have, 65% didn't firmly oppose. But on the ADD front, I think President Trump is taking the steps that are consistent with policies he ran on, consistent with the argument he made at the time he was running to be president. We have to reassert the importance of America and our borders and our immigration policy and our refugee policy. We have to make them matter for America.